The equipment we utilize, we're down to a corn planter, a no-till drill, and a self-propelled sprayer. And we have, a 16-row Kinsey planter we pull with an 8110 John Deere, and a 15-foot John Deere no-till drill that we have an 8200 on. We do have an articulate tractor because with the dairy operation, we use it for packing silage. The equipment costs are not that great compared to a conventional operation our size. The sprayer, we have put precision technology on it. Each nozzle has its own solenoid. It shuts off. We're currently working on trying to get waterways where we can just spray straight through the field, and the sprayer is shutting off across the waterways, so we can get more waterways, concentrated flow areas protected, and keep the soil where it belongs. The corn planter attachments I've messed around with every year since we started. I try something different, and I'm pretty happy with it now. Probably the only change we're going to make this year is we use drag chains on the back. We were having some issues, and as damp as everything was, the way they mount up against your closing wheels, we were having some plugging issues, so my youngest son kind of designed a new bracket that's just a T-shape that's going to move everything back, and we'll have more space for the closing wheel back there. So it's been an ongoing process. We look at something different every year where we have the biggest issue, and we just, the weakest link thing, we just try and find what that is and improve it. The obstacles to adopting it are probably mostly mental. We live up right off the eastern end of Lake Ontario. We get a lot of snow. We're wet in the spring, and I've been interested in it for a long time, and I said, it won't work here. It's just not going to work for us. We have to do some tillage to dry things out. We have to, to make this happen. And, on our accidental discoveries with the no-till and cover crops, we found out, guess what? We can do this, and it does work well. And with the amount of manure we have to move, it can be a challenge. I mean, this spring was interesting to say the least, to try and keep manure out of the pit. We were in touch with DEC a few times saying, hey, we're in freeboard, what do you want us to do? And they worked through it quite well. So sources of fertility on the farm, we do use inorganic fertilizers. We use a lot of manure, and the cover crops integrate well. Cover cropping on the farm, like I said, 2007 is when we kind of started all this. And question is, why are you using cover crops? The erosion control is definitely a big one, but the biggest reason we use them is they do the tillage for us. They break up the compaction layers. The first couple years, you kind of wonder, okay, is this really working? Are we getting the benefit for the dollars we're spending? Over time, you really see that happening. You can, the water infiltration is definitely a big factor. We've got some big dairies nearby that even now we're starting to see some corn curling because we went from too wet to too dry up there, and there's a difference. The porosity of the soil, the roots are able to get down and get to that water, so it is real. Review your general cover crop procedures. Well, we're starting to plant cover crops now. We have a very short rotation on the alfalfa ground. It's 3 years of hay, and that includes seeding year. We will take the alfalfa out after the third year and come in with tillage radishes. It's just kind of one of my favorites, and if anybody wants to start no-tilling and cover cropping, that's where I would do it. You have already a few years of hay that the ground hasn't been tilled, and the radishes for us up in our area, they just do a wonderful job of the tilth in the spring. The ground is very mellow, and most corn planters can be successful planting into that situation. Yes. Some years we will take off the last cutting. Fourth cutting for us isn't usually a huge amount of tonnage, so take the third cutting now, spread manure, kill it, and then plant the radishes. This year we're pushed back, so I think we're going to spray the third cutting next week, then harvest it, plant manure, and then we'll go in with the radishes. In our area, we like to be done with radishes by the 20th of August. And I remember that date very well because it's my anniversary. So I make sure that before our anniversary, cover crops are done, or radishes are done. So it works well. We also, right now, after wheat, we have a 10-way mix that has sunflowers in it. It has sorghum, sudax, many different species. It's just something that, Paul has a nice calculator that you can put together some crops or some different species with. And we had a wonderful guy up at NRCS for a while that we sat down and said, well, let's try this. That's kind of cool. Let's see what we can get. And we had sunflowers in it. And the biggest benefit of that cover crop mix was, as a dairy, we're near quite a few towns, and nobody likes the smell of manure. But when the sunflowers are out there, we were everybody's friend, and we had a lot of people stop in and, can we cut sunflowers? And we were like, yeah, go ahead, take them. And it was a very good public relations type thing. So we are doing it again this year for that reason. And we actually had a few people ask, are you planting sunflowers again? Yeah, we'll do it. So that's it. That part. After corn silage comes off, cereal rye is a real easy one. And then we're starting to get into some mixes, more complex mixes with more benefits. There again, using Paul's calculator to see what the benefits are. And annual ryegrass is probably my favorite. A lot of benefits. It doesn't look like a lot on the top, but if you actually start digging the roots and you use an air tank and blow, there's a lot of root growth underground. And even planted late, it doesn't look like there's a lot going on in the spring. There'll be a lot of growth down there, and that's penetrating those hard pan layers. Changes you made to your operation to fit. That was a long, slow process. The biggest obstacle change thing that we faced was the amount of manure, and we just do not spread in the springtime when the ground is wet, because that's when your greatest compaction time is. So this is the time of the year that we're trying to move a lot of manure. After corn silage, we're set up to move a lot. There's now 2 custom guys in the neighborhood that are setting up with drag lines. We've done a little bit of that, and that is a very efficient way to move manure. So we're going more that way. Do you use reduced tillage? Really, no. My youngest son is 16. Farm that we just bought a couple years ago, we're still taking out fence rows and cleaning it up, and he ran the disc the other day, and he was in it for about an hour, and he got out, and he's like, can you get somebody else to do this? This is boring. And he's never done any tillage. We really don't. We've got a disc that we bought in '95 that we still use. It's still working because we really don't do a lot. If we cause some ruts in the fall, combining corn, in the spring we'll go back and touch up those spots. But for the most part, we really don't anymore.
Okay, Dave. Excellent job. I've seen Dave talk many times, and I just want to say I have the same anniversary date, so we'll toast, at the same time. So I want to give that next over to Jay. Great job.
Yeah, my name is Jay Swede. I farm in the corner of Wyoming, Genesee, and Livingston County. We work about 4,500 acres of ground. We grow corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa. We work with a lot of dairies around us, supplying them some alfalfa and corn silage. We do grow processing vegetables, sweet corn, string beans, peas, lima beans. So we do have a diverse rotation. The vegetable crops do give us a great opportunity to put cover crops in. And so that's one of the things that we have a big advantage with that. We have started putting cover crops in 2-3 weeks ago when some of our peas came off, so that we can get some good growth on some of them and get going early with them. As far as reduced tillage, we started strip tillage in about 2005 is when we first started working with that. And we haven't really gone to the no-till side completely. I'm not brave enough yet. We're working on it. We're getting there. We're trying to get ourselves set up for a little bit better. With the processing vegetables, we have challenges of trying to we have issues with material on top of the ground that we can't have. We have to have a clean surface when we're going into harvest peas or when we're going into harvest string beans. We can't be taking that material into the plant. So that's one of the issues that we have. So we still do some conventional tillage on mainly our bean crops. And as far as how to work through that, we're trying to work through it. We just haven't got there. Some people have had some luck with it, but we're not there yet. As far as transitioning into the strip tillage, we just happened to see some of the neighbors playing around with it. We said we wanted to try it, so we partnered with another neighbor and said, let's just work together for a year or two. And they ran a planter, we ran the planter. They had a strip tiller, and we just worked together. And the first year, our best crops were on the strip tilled ground. And so the next year, we bought our own equipment, and kind of went about half of our land the next year. And then now we're pretty much, all of our sweet corn is strip tilled, all of our soybeans, field corn, everything else is strip tilled except for some of our processing beans. We said when we did it, we weren't going to do it unless we didn't want to go backwards on our yields. We wanted to move forward. We wanted to increase our yields, and that was right from that point on. Our yields have done nothing but increase ever since we went with the strip till. One of the bigger benefits that we've seen from the strip till was placing our nutrients, and we've become big proponents of making sure we're placing our nitrogen, placing our starters, placing everything that we possibly can. So what we do is we go through with a strip tiller. We're running a little deeper than most. We're running about 12 to 13 inches, but we're trying to put our nitrogen 6 to 8 inches below the seed. And then when our planter's going through, we're putting a 2x2 of a starter blend, depending on the year, depending on what we want to try. And then we're also putting in furrow with the seed. So we got 3 different places that we're putting our fertility, and then we also come back in and side dress. So we're kind of mixing it up and putting in different times as much as we possibly can. Some of the obstacles that we noticed with reduced tillage is we have to be patient. In the springtime, we want to get things done, but we have to be patient. If we can be patient enough, and this year was hard. I don't think we were patient enough, but we have to let that ground warm up, let that ground dry out so that we can build a zone and do what we need to do and do it right. When we get a little bit too early, we get some smearing on our sidewalls and some other stuff that restricts the crop enough that we have to be careful of that. As far as our soil fertility, I think I touched on that, but we do work with a lot of dairies. So we use a lot of manure throughout the year. Springtime manure I hate. Summertime manure I love it. I love to put the manure down, get a cover crop growing into it, and then recycle those nutrients back into the soil is kind of the way we like to do it. Unfortunately, we have to take it throughout the season, so we have to work through all those challenges, but the compaction of the manure is probably one of our biggest challenges that we have to deal with. We have to work through that every year, and I struggle with it every year. As far as soil testing and some of the other things, we've been working on doing some of the soil health tests. We sample all of our ground every 3 years. We are doing grid sampling, working on trying to pinpoint where we need to put everything, doing some variable rate seeding, some variable rate fertilizer. As far as technology goes, one of the things that probably helped us more on strip till than anything else we ever did was going with auto steer. So when we first started, we were trying to do it by hand, and it didn't really work out. Second year, we bought a auto steer system for the strip tiller machine. In the third year, we bought auto steer for the planter, and fourth year, we went with RTK. RTK was probably the biggest improvement that we could have done to make our system work. We can go in and the tractors can steer themselves, plant that seed right over top of that strip, and try to be in the center of it every time. And that's where we saw the biggest benefit. I don't know how much time you want me to take, but if you want to. So.
Okay, we'll have time for questions to elaborate, so we'll turn it over to John.
Hello, I'm John Kemmeren, and our farm is in Bainbridge, New York, Chenango County. I farm with my wife and my son and my daughter. We have 750 tillable acres, everything from continuous permanent hay ground to some continuous corn, and everything else in between. Our farm is very hilly, and we also farm 140 acres of valley land. We started no-tilling, we started experimenting with no-tilling in 1975, so this is the 44th year. Early 80s, we actually started growing corn, and that was no-till. So it's been a long time. So most of our home farm has never ever even seen a plow or even been tilled. So that's, we're pretty proud of that. But there was a couple slides that somebody's going to play in a minute. We were told to bring some. If I had known nobody else was going to bring some, I'd brought a couple hundred. But so we're pretty hilly ground, and everybody's like, how beautiful it is. And we go out to flat ground and go, how beautiful that is. So we work a lot. We have a manure storage, and I think that's really important, as somebody else touched on here about, soil compaction. That's a really very important thing. And back in the 70s and 80s, all the manure went on the home farm. So the levels of potassium are super high, and phosphorus. And since we've been able to, we purchased our own truck a few years ago, and it's helped us haul manure around, which is one very good thing. So on the home farm, we have not applied any potash fertilizer since the 1970s. And we buy a little bit of nitrogen, and where we don't get manure, we may put a little potash on, but it's been very little bit over the years. Our crop yields have improved. We started using cover crops in the early 80s when they were flying it on with a helicopter. Some years was a very good success, some years it was very poor. I see they're resurging that again. I'm surprised because of all the poor years, but we try to use cover crops on all the land that we can where we grow corn. This past year was a very, very poor year. It was probably the worst harvest year I ever remember, and we were only able to get cover crops on about a third of our ground. And one thing I found very interesting this spring is where we no-tilled corn into fields which were partially cover cropped and partially not, that where they were partially cover cropped, the corn was at least a foot higher than where it wasn't. The soil was drier, corn came up faster, and the yields are definitely going to be better. So it was just a phenomenal difference. Cover crops we use after corn, we use cereal rye. We're usually into late September, and that's about the only option where we live. We do some small grains, then we plant 10-way cover crops or more. We had taken some rye off this year, and we were going to put Sudan grass in, and then I had a chance to sell all my Sudan grass seed. And I did, so we planted pollinator mix and solar mix, and I guess Dave talked about sunflowers, and there's nothing can make a woman happier than sunflowers. And so it's just, and my son really likes bees, and so the sunflowers are going to come into bloom here really quickly, so it'll be pretty interesting. As far as equipment, we own our own planter. We have a 6-row white planter, which was from 1994. We've owned that since 1995. We have very little on. We had no-till colders for a while. We took them off. Never will put them back on. It's just not needed. We use one spike closing wheel. We have a Great Plains drill that we use for seedings and cover crops. I really like the drill. It's maybe not the most perfect in the world, but I certainly do like that. We've done very well with that. So the last 4 years, we've tried to do all the corn planting we can. We planted green. We planted the cover crops, green cover crop rye. We've tried it every way in the world. We've sprayed it the same time, right after we've planted it, with paraquat and killed it the next day. We've used, and we really liked that. And we've had some fields where I thought the rye wasn't there. I'd let it grow for a couple weeks till the corn started coming up, and then spray it with Roundup. And that's probably not a good idea, even though it looked nice. I thought it really set the corn back. Took too long for the rye to go down. So this next year, I was told by my son he wants to go away from paraquat, and he thinks he can save a lot of money by just using one spray system right after we plant corn. So as far as rolling corn, we've never rolled rye after we've planted corn or before, and I think it's probably not a bad idea, but I don't really think it hurts yield, and I don't think it's hurt yields for us. I thought it's kept the geese and the crows out of the field real well, and I thought the deer hadn't bothered it at all either. And the last 2 years, we've gone to using a lot of Avapel for bird control, which is approved in New York State, and I think it's worked wonders for us. Okay, where are we here? So last year we built a pack barn for the heifers, and we spread bedding pack manure on fields, and I kind of thought a lot of that we did hurt yield, and I think so we're looking into composting that, different ways to try to break the carbon to nitrogen ratio down a little bit before you put it on the field, because where we put it on pretty heavy you can see. So we try to spread as much manure as I can on corn ground after the corn harvest, right at the same time that we plant the cover crops, so it can be available for the next year. And if we can do that correctly, we'll cut the nitrogen rate by 75%. So we're fields that we've put on where we've had good manure on cover crop, planted green, we've gone through with only 50 pounds of nitrogen, and we've gotten 200 bushel corn. So. All right. So no-till seedings, we'd gone kind of a lot away from alfalfa. We've gone to more clover and grass mixes. One of the problems in our area with alfalfa is it attracts deer by the hundreds, not tens, by the hundreds. And they know where that is. So grass mixes, they don't seem to bother so bad. So. All right.
Okay, so at this portion of the farmer panel, I think it's up to you folks who have been listening to these farmers to ask some specific questions related to their system, and or related to questions that you've, as farmers, what you've encountered and want to ask some folks how they deal with some similar issues.
Good question. How do you handle the residue after you combine corn?
Our combine does a really good job of spreading it out, and then we really don't do anything. If I can cover crop rye into that, and we'll go as late as the middle of October, and usually we're done combining by the middle of October. Then all we'll do in the spring is we'll use row cleaners. We don't use no-till holders, like I said. We'll use row cleaners and find that's an excellent job. Now, where we're gonna do new seeding the next year, we always try to chop that for silage. And if we don't, we harvested rye for bedding for straw one year where we had combined it, and we got 25% corn stalks. So, but otherwise, we just don't really do anything. So.
Most of our combine corn is rotated to soybeans the next year, so it's not usually an issue. If we do go back in and put corn on corn where it was combined, we have the RTK, and we'll just split the rows, and we don't have row cleaners, we don't have no-till coulters. And I'm not saying it's perfect. You'll have an issue here and there, plug a closing wheel with a wad or something, but that's generally how we handle it.
It's a challenge for us. We do use a chopping corn head, but sometimes that puts a mat of stuff right on the ground, and it dries slow for us. It's just being patient in the spring, and with the RTK, we're shifting our rows 15 inches every year. We just go back and forth, so we'll go right between the row, just like you said, and put it right between the row. And with a strip till, we at least have the ability to loosen the ground a little bit and let it dry a little bit before we get in with a planter.
Anyone have another question?
We use, it's just hay bedding, just chopped hay. We have a bale chopper, Anderson bale chopper, and we basically, my son, we bed it every second day. We use one round bale every 2 days. He'll drive the chopper on the feeding alley, and we have a manure alley, and he'll shoot right over top of the manure alley right into the pens. So it really works well and scoops out really easy. And we're fortunate in our area that there's a lot of farmland available to cut bedding on for virtually nothing, so. I didn't think it was detrimental. It certainly didn't help you know, we're talking 75 loads of manure, you know, where are you gonna put it? If you put 75 loads on 20 acres of corn ground, yeah, we got a Myers that's got spinners on it, but, you know, vertical beaters, but still, it puts it on heavy, it looked nice, and we just couldn't get ahead of I mean, I knew the field didn't need nitrogen, but I even put nitrogen on and I'm gonna say it probably is gonna cost us 50 bushel an acre, so we're probably looking at 130 bushel of corn, where I think if we could compost it, we might even have a market for it, so.
Any question?
Are any of you guys interested in corn or vegetables? And if so, what's your management around getting that there?
Cover crops?
Yeah, or, you know, some green cover.
No, I've always been interested in it, and I've seen it on small scale where people have done it, and it's just, and I talked to my son about it, and it's like, who has time to do that with a machine, you know? If you could do it with an airplane, I've had a few customers interested in doing that, and it's just, you know, time constraint, you know, but I do like it where I've seen it, so. But we haven't done any, no.
We're playing around with it. From what I could see, it's hard to get it established, and if we're combining that corn, it just doesn't seem to get much growth. The cover crop. We're lucky because we do have a lot of vegetables, so we can get, you know, 1,000 acres of cover crops in by end of September, and so that's usually most of our cover crops are going on that side of it. But we would like to do something when we go into side dress to see if we could at least do something at that time. And it would just be on the same pass where you wouldn't have to add an additional pass.
Can you guys discuss a little bit your thoughts on seeding rates and how that affects getting the next crop established and stuff like that?
So we originally started using rye as one of our main cover crops, and this was back years ago when we were doing mostly moldboard plowing, and it always seems like it would get away from us. And then as time went on, we started using a lot more oats, and if we could put the oats down at, you know, a couple bushel the acre, as long as they didn't get too big on us in the fall, that seemed to be a good thing to work with, because if they get too big, they'll fall over and then they seal the ground up and we have trouble with it drying out. And then lately we've been playing around with doing strips of oats and radishes. So we go in and drill, and we have a seeder on the drill and then the main hopper on the drill, and we plug off alternating rows of the drill, so we're putting oats and then tillage radishes, and then when we come in to plant, we're planting through the tillage radishes, and then everything dies off in the spring, so we don't have to do any additional spray. And then we are also playing around with doing wheat and oats the same way, where we're coming in and planting on the oats, so that we don't have the issues of planting green, and we struggled getting the seed in the way we wanted over top of that wheat. So this way we're still keeping the green, but we're planting into the oats that winter kill. And so some of those are the things that we're doing. And I mean, we might be doing a bushel the acre of wheat and a bushel of the acre of oats at that time.
Oh, what is that, your cutoff time for the radish and the oats in the fall?
It'd be right around the 20th. So.
Yeah. As far as seeding rates, is that what the question is? You know, we're still learning. We've been all over the board, but we tend to go probably on the light side, just because we are so wet in the spring that if you get too much of a crop mat, it kind of becomes an issue. And we've just found that the benefit of the cover crop is there, but it's easier to deal with in the springtime if it's not planted as a harvestable crop. As far as a cereal rye, I'm going to be quizzing John here when we're done, because we're interested in trying to do the planting green. We've done it a couple times, variable success. You know, it's still a learning curve for us, but as far as the rates go, we tend to go light.
Well, I'm from the school where if a little is good, more is better, so. We've had cost sharing a lot of times for the cover crops, you know, and they require at least 100 pounds of rye or 110 pounds to get the 100 pounds of germinated rye, you know. But you know, I've gone to the no-till conference a few times and everybody says, oh my gosh, that's way too much. But if they're paying, I'm putting it on. But so, you know, I should have meant, you know, mostly it's like October 5th or October 7th date, you know, for that. And after that, they'll have to see if it grows. But we plant rye right into November, and I can barely even see it come up. And I've talked to people like at the no-till conference that have planted rye in January, and they're not even worried about it coming up. But I mean, the rye that we've planted in November, and it's like in December, you're looking around, you see little sprouted seeds. It's amazing the growth that we've gotten in the spring. So, yeah, so we're pretty much, you know, population and. You know, like for the solar mix too and the pollinator mix, if it calls for 25 to 30, it better at least be 30 out of that drill because I don't want to clean it out. So.
We had a pretty wet spring. Did you guys notice some of your better no-till ground next to compared to neighbors? Any differences that?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, where we had cover crops there, the corn was way better. But you know, we used patience, and we backed off a little bit on days. But I mean, I think all our corn is excellent condition. You know, it certainly can't see that it hurt. Very little bit late, but you know, we finished planting corn on June 13 with 75-day corn. So yeah, but I mean, but we don't try to plant corn on wet ground either. So.
Yeah, we finished, I think, June 20th. We quit when we had enough acres in it. We were comfortable. We've got a lot of prevented plant acres that are in Sudex because prevent plant cows can't eat, so we have to feed the animals. The thing we learned this year is just because we can doesn't mean we should. The soil structure has developed enough that we did plant one field. It's 50 acres. Of course, it's on the main road right on the corner that everybody sees. And it is probably the worst cornfield population-wise in the Tri-County area. It looks horrible, but it's going to make some yield at least. I did feel good coming down the thruway. I saw one that looked probably just as bad, but we were able to get out on that field and plant when we probably shouldn't have, and we did. And I think, you know, I'm always trying to learn from things. Looking back, I'd say, well, I'd probably try it again, but we'd have to put row cleaners on. We had such a heavy mat of cover crop that it laid there, and then we ended up with cutworms, armyworms, slugs. It was just kind of a bad situation, but I guess I'll take that and I'll learn from it and move on.
This year, I think, seems as though every time the planners came back, they asked how things went in, and they said we shouldn't have done that. And that was just the common theme of the whole year. But looking back, I think the strip till and a little bit deeper tillage this year helped us. If the calendar was 2 to 3 weeks earlier, it'd probably be some of the better crops we've ever had. But it's just, I think that helped us this year. So it's hard to say. Some of the conventionally tilled ground that people were doing the same thing as us, saying, you know they shouldn't have been out there, but everybody had to get something in. It's variable, and it's really hurting.
Anyone have one last question? Let's see. Here we go.
How are you putting on your liquid manure? Are you injecting it or supplying it?
For us, depending on the situation, a lot of it is injected. We're doing some drag line injection, and some of it is top spread, depending on if we're coming right back in with a cover crop.
Yeah, and we're just all surface supplied. We haven't found an injector yet that we feel will work in the no-till on the hay ground. And a lot of the manure in the summer is going out on hay ground. So we're just 100% surface supplied.
We're also 100% surface supplied. We have a truck and a truck liquid spreader, a tractor liquid spreader, and a dry spreader for the bedding pack manure. And seems if we can spread manure in the fall, it's very little odor. I think most all the nitrogen is captured by the cover crop or even on the hay ground. You can tell tremendous difference in the spring where we did it. But So backing up a little bit here to what they were saying a second ago, so I noticed like last year, and I don't know when your bad field of corn was planted, but many, many acres in our area which were planted from, I'm gonna say the 8th of June till the 12th of June never came up. I mean, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of acres. We planted corn on cover crops in that same time, and all our corn is perfect. And I think a lot of it was just the cold and the fact that the soil got saturated and ours didn't. And the cover crops were getting pretty good height at that point. It protected the soil. But I mean, I sell seed for King's Agri-Seed, and we had tremendous amount of replants for them days. And it's amazing that so late in the season you would see that. But that's the way it was.
Why don't you discuss some of the negative challenges you've had? Basically, Jay mentioned something about, or maybe it was Dave, somebody mentioned about armyworms and insects, and then there's the slug issue, and then it sounds like you guys have your fertility situation under control, but a lot of people who don't probably could have yield drag due to the carbon to nitrogen ratio of too much rye. But why don't you just give some thought of what you've seen in the past and maybe what you did to overcome it or what you've seen?
So as far as the carbon to nitrogen ratio for the rye, we always run 30 pounds of nitrogen through a 2x2, and I don't think I've ever really seen a problem with lack of nitrogen. A lot of corn on a lot of farms goes in without any fertilizer, 2x2, and I think they may have a real issue. As far as slugs, it takes a real bad slug to hurt a corn crop. We don't grow soybeans, so I can't attest for them, but one time we did call Cooperative Extension because I thought the slugs were so bad on our corn, and this was a few years ago, and they looked at it and says, oh, it'll outgrow it, and eventually it did outgrow it. But I'm also surprised how much slug damage I see on conventional fields. Just going around, just see slug damage where they've plowed and disc the fields. It's there also. Armyworm, we try to scout corn almost every day anyway, but with the traded hybrids today, and we use mostly traded hybrids, and a lot of them are pretty immune to it, and probably got a little lax in scouting a little too much road scouting, so.
Yeah, we actually plant 100% conventional corn. We have no traded corn on the farm, and that was just from observation of we were putting together our seed corn order, and it's like, well, I haven't used Roundup over the top on the corn in the last 5 years anyhow, and it was $25,000 savings. Now this was back 6-8 years ago. Now the new conventional corns, non-GMO seed corn prices are going up, so that gap has narrowed quite a bit. Actually, I think next year we'll be planting some Roundup Ready corn because it's going to be cheaper than some of the non-GMO corns. We just have a crop scout, and they keep track of the insect issues. We don't do a lot of spraying for them, but once in a while we will have to go in and cutworm seems to be our issue, if you will.
The slugs were a challenge for us, but I think it looks worse than it actually is on corn. On soybeans, it can be a bigger issue, but we've never had too many problems on soybeans. Early planted corn, if we can use road cleaners and clean that strip wide enough to get the seed between it, it seems like we have less problems than if we have the trash going over top of it.
Anyone have another question? Okay, quiet bunch here today. So when we give a round of applause for our farmers.